Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you all. I have the privilege of being the 68th Governor of Gibraltar. I work in an office in which every Governor of Gibraltar has worked since the then Governor in 1720 evicted those poor friars from the convent. When he was not out and about on the rock, visiting defences or inspiring the troops, General Elliot worked in the same office, including throughout the Great Siege of 1789 to 1793. The office is the same one in which 4 governors worked throughout World War II, including, of course, Lieutenant General Sir Clive Liddell, who took the important decision to evacuate most of the population, initially to Morocco at the start of the war. Sitting at my desk, I often wonder what my historic predecessors would think of the 68th Governor, and I often ponder if I'm up to the challenge, when those challenges are so very different than perhaps my predecessors have had to face, politically, militarily, and socially. Over the last few years, we have lived in troublesome times. I sometimes question whether Gibraltar has ever faced such a combination of demands as Brexit and COVID together, but of course it has. After all, I've mentioned 2 already. In those days, of course, the governor was to all intents and purposes a viceroy with complete and absolute authority. Prior to 1950, the governor retained all the legislative power, but that year saw the creation of the Gibraltar Legislative Council and a degree of self-government. 19 years later, Gibraltar elected its first House of Assembly, and then with the 2006 Constitution, the current Parliament came into being. Since 1950, therefore, the extent of the legislative authority vested in the governor has diminished. Not so long ago, I attended a lunch here in Gibraltar when one elderly gentleman was reflecting on his time as aide-de-camp to the governor, when, in his words, governors really were governors. At that moment, as I can imagine you understand, I felt very small. And while he didn't mean it as an insult, he clearly felt that times have changed. I also recall, however, that on my appointment, one commentator wrote that while the absolute authority of the governor was not as it once was, the governor is still the governor. And in that capacity, he retains the privilege of a position that allows him to advise, influence, and persuade in the development of policy that affects the lives of everybody in Gibraltar. I believe he was spot on. I also think that in saying this, he suggested that the role of governor may actually have become somewhat more challenging than it once was. Arguably, the governor today has to rely much more on advocacy and persuasion to achieve what he thinks is right, more than he ever did prior to 1950. Furthermore, as society is so open, deference to position has waned, and the mystique of the role has perhaps reduced as governors, rightly, in my mind, have aspired to become much more representative of and included in the society they serve. Moreover, before about 1960, he really was a military governor, appointed by the military, and therefore knew exactly the command basis on which he was to operate. Since the turn of the century, the 21st century, governors have been appointed, of course, by Her Majesty the Queen, but on the advice of the Foreign Office. He has therefore to be a military man, a Foreign Office man, and to make matters even more uncertain, but above all, the Queen's man. Today, therefore, he has to walk a very fine line. Without absolute authority over everything, including the regiment here that is formed in his name, he's much like the sovereign he represents, appointed as a de facto head of state without many of the tools, administrative, political, or otherwise, to effect his constitutional responsibilities. If invoked, the absolute power he enjoys would create a constitutional crisis and would in all probability see him evicted by the Chief Minister from the Rock on the first British Airways flight back to London and in economy class at that. Like the sovereign he represents, he has to exercise judgment about his involvement in day-to-day matters in a much more nuanced way than perhaps his predecessors were ever needed to do. With a small team of Foreign Office officials in the convent to deal with much of the wider policy work, the governor could, if he so choose, just sail, walk, eat, open a few buildings, name a few monkeys, appear on parades, and rubber stamp the papers placed in front of him. But no person of any caliber selected for this prestigious role would wish that. They are, after all, representing Her Majesty in one of the territories she cares for deeply. The Queen's guiding principle in life is to serve. She would wish no less of her governors abroad. And service comes in many more forms other than just attending garden parties. The governor retains absolute authority under the Constitution for defence, internal security and foreign affairs. Her Majesty's government of Gibraltar, with elected representatives, is vested with authority in everything other than these three areas of business. Importantly, however, the governor also retains responsibility for ensuring overall good governance. What does this actually mean under a constitution where it is clear that he has no role in many areas of government and where it would perhaps be somewhat controversial to impose his ideas of good governance? I would submit that of all the constitutional roles, this is his most important role. To a degree, it is the role that Her Majesty the Queen fulfills in the United Kingdom, and of course the Governor of Gibraltar is Her Majesty's personal representative in Gibraltar. He is therefore head of the government of Gibraltar. He works alongside and with the Chief Minister and his government to protect the best interests of the people of Gibraltar, provides advice and counsel, and acts as a critical friend as the occasions demand. Importantly also, even at a time when communication is so easy, he exists to provide that link between Her Majesty's governments, one in London and the other in Gibraltar, maintaining relations between not only two governments and parliaments, but also two places and two peoples 1,100 miles apart. In essence, in all that he does, he is here to ensure that under the Constitution, Gibraltar and the United Kingdom remain as one family, united not just by a common language, but also ideals and principles, for as long as the people of Gibraltar wish it to be so. And like many families, when there is a squabble, it is the governor's responsibility in part to try to create a solution and indeed to ensure harmony. What does that look like in practical terms? I think I can give you a few examples just since I arrived here. Throughout the pandemic, my team in the convent has sought to support the local community and including, of course, the cross-border workers in a very clear way, understanding the requirements on the ground and seeking the necessary support from the United Kingdom when it has been required. That is not just in securing the right vaccines, but also the additional expertise that has been necessary to ensure the efficient rollout of the vaccines and, of course, ensuring that the vaccines get here in the first place. Just as important, perhaps, has been the assistance provided during the Brexit negotiations, not just ensuring that London understands the needs and aspirations of the government here, but also making sure that the government of Gibraltar is sensitive to the needs of the people of the United Kingdom in these negotiations. In summary, the governor and the convent team have provided a little of the oil to the wheels of a very difficult negotiating process, which is, of course, diplomacy in action. And on many other occasions, I have sought to make sure that the process of administration runs smoothly in accordance with the law and what Gibraltarians would expect of its administration. I gave an interview in the Chronicle not so long ago when I spoke about the challenges of Brexit and my hopes for a successful outcome. One commentator on social media criticised me for becoming too involved in politics, saying that the governor and the convent should stay completely out of such matters and perhaps concentrate only on the ceremonial aspects of the role. But COVID and Brexit have brought into stark contrast the factors on which the role of the governor pivots. That is, the sensitive and complex balance between the ceremonial and representational, and importantly, the constitutional, which of course sits in the political and the diplomatic areas of governance. While the ceremonial has always attracted more attention because it inhabits a very consumable and press-driven domain, the constitutional side is exercised more discreetly and therefore may lead to the assumption in this modern age it doesn't exist at all. The events of the last few years have, I suggest, made the governor's constitutional, political and diplomatic roles much more visible than they have been for some time. Not new roles, not a new governor stepping into an area or areas of business in which he shouldn't, but just roles that in any other circumstances could be exercised in a less public way. The last 2 years have made that rather more difficult, and in any event, at a time of real difficulty, I suspect that the people of Gibraltar would wish their governor to step up and do his utmost to support the community, other than in a purely ceremonial or representational role. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not hide from the fact that I came to Gibraltar to serve the people of Gibraltar. In my inaugural address to Parliament, I spoke about how Gibraltar is a place that honours its past, lives the present, and focuses on a prosperous and inclusive future. I spoke about helping Gibraltar in the shadow of Brexit, to reach out to all the countries of the Commonwealth and elsewhere to forge new and exciting trade and economic partnerships, as well as the opportunities in the wider world. I recognised my office as the clearest possible symbol of friendship between one people geographically separated, but no less bound tightly together. And as I said at that time, and no one seems to have taken against this in the 20 months that I have been here, that my role is also a vehicle through which to effect change where it is beneficial to all. And I finish my speech in this way. I will watch, listen, learn, and will make sure that the voice of Gibraltar is heard and understood where it needs to be heard. And I hope to be more than just a symbol, playing my part in the most positive way in the daily life of Gibraltar, and where my abilities allow, actively helping this Parliament as permitted to me under the Constitution in all the work that it has to do. In those ways and in others, I commit myself to the service of Gibraltar, its people and its government, and hope that in very short order, I will indeed be useful. 20 months on, and the day before Her Majesty the Queen celebrates 70 years of service to the United Kingdom, to Gibraltar and the Commonwealth, and unless you tell me otherwise, I see no reason to change that ambition, even if I have to walk the very fine constitutional line that governors now have to tread. Thank you for your patience in listening.